3, 2, 1.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Borough's Planning Committee this evening. I propose to take the agenda as printed, so we'll start with item 1 and just ask if we've got any apologies this evening. I know of none personally. It's looking like we don't have any apologies. In that case, let's move on to item 2 on our agenda, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to make such a declaration this evening? And again, I'm taking silence to mean that no such declarations are being made. Therefore, let's move to item 3 of our agenda, minutes of previous meetings. As printed, are members content that those are a correct record of our previous proceedings?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And again, I don't hear any dissident voices, so let's say that those are in fact a correct record. That brings us to our first substantive item, application for major development at Tadgedale Quarry. Now, my understanding is that we have a public speaker on this item. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll bring him in, Chair.
If we bring him in, and then I'll ask our officers if there's anything further to report before inviting him to speak. So, good evening to Mr. Weatherly. I hope you can both see and hear the committee now.
Good evening, Chair. Yes, I can. I hope you can hear me okay.
I can indeed. Now, before I ask you to speak, Mr. Weatherly, I'm just going to ask our officers whether they have anything further to add to their report this evening, so that to give you a chance to hear that as well. So if I can just make that question now. Is there anything extra that we need to know before we invite Mr. Weatherly to speak?
No, Chair, nothing further to report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in that case, I'll just run through the speaking protocol for the benefit of anyone listening who's not familiar with it. Mr. Weatherly has 5 minutes to address the committee. That will be the sum total of his contribution to our proceedings this evening. After 4 of those minutes have elapsed, he will be given an oral warning by our clerk to make sure that he doesn't miss any points that he thinks are absolutely pertinent. So on those terms, I invite you, Mr. Weatherly, to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. And thank you for the opportunity in current circumstances to speak in support of this item on behalf of the applicant. So this reserve matters planning application seeks approval for the layout, appearance, scale and landscaping of the proposed development of 128 dwellings at Tadgedale Quarry in Loggerheads. The site already benefits from outline planning permission, which granted consent for the principle of residential development of the site, and also included detailed consent for vehicular access into the site and associated vehicular movements to and from the site with regard to the provision of 128 dwellings within it. Therefore, the only matters relevant to the determination of this application this evening are primarily design and appearance matters. This site comprises brownfield land, at least in part, and forms a key component of the Council's deliverable housing land supply. Following the recent decision of the Council to withdraw from the joint local plan process with Stoke-on-Trent City Council, it is clearly important for the Council to work proactively with the developers of sites with an existing planning permission in the absence of an up-to-date local plan. This will help to ensure that approved sites can come forward and be delivered in a timely manner, which the approval of this reserve matters planning application will help to achieve, all being well, of course. The proposals before you today have been informed by detailed pre-application engagement with your officers. In addition, further changes to the proposals have been made during the course of the application over several months in response to comments by your officers, statutory consultees, Loggerheads Parish Council and other third parties, so it's been a collaborative process over recent months. This has culminated in the proposal before you today, which would provide a broad range of house types, including bungalows, smaller dwellings suitable for first-time buyers, and family housing. 32 affordable houses are included in the housing mix, 19 of which would be available for social rent, with the remaining 13 being shared ownership units. Each of the proposed dwellings in terms of size would comply with the nationally described space standards. The applicant has acknowledged the need to comply with neighbourhood plan, including policy LNPG2, which requires the provision of 1 and 2 bedroom properties, as well as properties suitable for independent living for the elderly. In this case, the proposal provides a total of 32 1 and 2 bedroom properties. A total of 15 bungalows would also be provided, and the total provision of smaller properties and homes suitable for the elderly would be 31%. Furthermore, the bulk of the proposed development comprises dwellings of 3 bedrooms or less, amounting to some 74% of the proposed development. As stated by your officers in the report, the development overall comprises a wide range of house types and would deliver a mixed and balanced community on a partly brownfield site that already benefits from outline consent. With regard to design matters, the form, materials and overall appearance of the dwellings would comply with the standards set out in the Council's Urban Design Guide, as well as the standards set out in the neighbourhood plan. The perimeters of the site would be well landscaped with existing trees retained. Members will note that there are no objections on design or landscape grounds from your officers. Officers have made the applicant aware of questions from members in the lead up to this evening's meeting relating to the provision of private driveways and any implications for weekly waste collections. So I just want to lastly touch on that point for you. Members will note that whilst a total of 14 dwellings will be served by shared private driveways rather than adopted highway, the highest number of dwellings served off any private driveway would be just 3. These driveways would occur in 6 separate locations towards the edges of the development in order to reduce the amount of engineering towards the edge of the site where most of the tree protection zones are located. In addition, they enable provision of a softer edge to the development within the wider countryside and a more pleasing environment, not least as this approach allows for more soft landscaping to be incorporated. The project architect has specifically incorporated the private driveways in question for these very reasons, and ultimately to achieve a high quality and appropriate design for this site and its context.
1 minute.
Thank you. The furthest distance from the front door of any dwelling on a private driveway to the edge of the adopted highway would be 15 metres. So that's the maximum distance travelled for taking bins for collection. By comparison, the houses fronting a adopted highway would have to, the occupants would have to travel 6 metres. So it's an insignificant difference and an insignificant distance to travel. I'd also add that private driveways prioritise pedestrians over cars, making for a safer environment. Therefore, the provision of these private driveways to serve 2 or 3 dwellings in locations around the perimeter of the site is considered to be entirely acceptable and also result in material design improvements to the scheme. Overall, and in conclusion, and as set out by your officers, this proposal is technically sound and will comply with the policies of the development plan when read as a whole. On behalf of the applicant, therefore, I respectfully request and encourage the approval of reserved matters consent this evening. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weatherly. Before I open the item for debate, I'll just ask our officers if there, again, is anything to comment on what they've just heard.
No, Chair, not at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you see the recommendations as printed before you, and I invite comment from members.
Chair, I think Councillor Panta wanted to speak on this application.
Okay, this is the time to do so. So, Councillor Panta.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I haven't got papers, so I don't really know what's included in the report. So perhaps I might wait until I hear from my learned colleague, Councillor Paul, and possibly your case officer, in case it doesn't cover what I'd say.
Hang on, Councillor Panta. And if you are speaking as a ward member rather than a member of the committee, you must speak now. You cannot speak. Oh. Okay.
Well, I'm a sub, so it goes either way.
Oh, in that case, if you're a sub councillor, that's absolutely fine. Who are you substituting for this evening?
Well, I don't know, but I am one. But well, my main concern was basically I didn't know whether this included certain constructive measures like deep drilling or something. If it's not, then I've got the wrong end of the stick, and there's no need for me to say any more.
I don't think that's part of the application in front of us, Councillor. And again, I would urge members to address the matter before us rather than any general matters. We can only deal with what is in the application in front of us this evening.
I unfortunately hadn't got the papers, so I couldn't say. In case nothing further, then, Chair.
Okay, thank you, councillor. So any other comment from members about this application?
I wonder if we can have a site plan just to have a look at the shared driveways, etc.
I don't know if Miss Colleen can do that for us.
Yeah, I'll just try that. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
So the shared driveways that were referred to are these. So there's a number of dwellings there over here. So as Mr. Weatherly mentioned, they're on the edges of the site really, and here and down at the bottom of the site. So it's a maximum, I think it's 14 or 15 properties across the whole site that are served off those shared driveways.
Okay. I mean, I must admit, I'm a bit disappointed that there are so many, and I just wondered if there's some work to be done on asking highways where they really can't adopt some of these, or some agreement to come that there are less shared.
Well, I did speak to the Highway Authority, and their comment was that the design guidance that they have allows private driveways to serve up to 5 dwellings, so they have no objection to these numbers of properties being served on private driveways. And you heard the comments from Mr. Weatherly about the reasoning for them, and obviously adopted highways can be quite heavily engineered with footways of a certain width on either side of the road and street lighting, whereas private driveways are an urban design solution really, I suppose, that can be used to soften the edges of the development, and in this type of location that's considered something that we would want to support.
Bit disappointing.
Rachel, could we see the top end of the?
Yeah.
Thank you. I take it the pink ones are the affordable housing.
No, they're not. The affordable housing are, it's a bit difficult to see here, but they're the ones with green dots on. So if I just point my cursor there, there's 2 there, 4 there, 3, 2, 2, 2 there, 3 there. So they're kind of spread about that part of the site really.
The pepper potted, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, unless members have any more questions specific to the site plan, if at this point, perhaps Ms. Colleen, you on share again, so that
Yeah, of course.
screen reverts. Any further comments on this development and the application recommendations? Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm glad to see this is finally coming to this committee. It's been some while since this was originally approved. I would like to see, though, however, in the conditions, a strengthening of the commitment that all investigations are conducted to a satisfactory condition in terms of the exploration of the aquifer being contaminated underneath. Obviously, a site of this nature will require a degree of piling in terms of the construction of these houses, and that represents a very clear danger of contaminants to the underneath part of this. Those that know the site very well will remember that there was a fair bit of land waste from the pottery slip industry, as was the amount of blue and white asbestos that was dumped in from the demolition of the sanatorium in the 60s. And I believe it has taken other things that were industrial waste of unknown nature and origin. And I wouldn't like the fact that we didn't put in due diligence now at this stage as a condition that we need to satisfy that process before any building can be done. I realise that there has been exchanges with the environmental team over this, but nonetheless, we still need to make sure and ensure that that's covered before building can take place, because that was the original condition of the application when it was approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if our officer wishes to comment on those remarks.
Yes, please, Chair. Yeah, when, as you say, Councillor, when the outline consent was granted at the public inquiry, there was a lot of discussion about contamination, and the inspector, in allowing the appeal, imposed a number of conditions relating to contamination, and those conditions remain valid. So before any development can commence, the conditions of both the outline consent and any that we impose on this reserved matters consent need to be fully complied with. So yeah, those conditions continue to be valid, and there's no need to impose them again at this stage.
Are you happy with that, Councillor?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Any further comment from members? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report is one shortcoming, which is that it doesn't mention that the outline planning consent for this application was granted on appeal. It isn't something that we at the Borough Council had found permissible. It's been allowed on appeal, although I do note that an application for costs on the part of the applicant there was refused because we as an authority hadn't behaved unreasonably. There are a couple of issues in the reserved matters application in front of us that form the basis of Loggerheads Parish Council's objection to the application. One of them is land remediation and contaminated land, and our report at page 16 refers to the comments of our Environmental Health Division. I don't know whether our officer had the wrong end of the stick, but the Environmental Health Division seemed to have recommended refusal. But do I understand correctly from our officers that this application does not relate to the discharge of the conditions that were applied by the planning inspector relating to the outline planning consent? I think the second issue, which is regrettable, is that Loggerheads have adopted a neighbourhood plan, and one of the objections from the parish council is that the requirements in terms of the percentage of dwellings which need to be smaller dwellings, which the neighbourhood plan refers to as around a third, is not met by this reserved matters application. And I'm very hesitant to make planning decisions that aren't in accordance with a local plan or a neighbourhood plan, because the neighbourhood plan is fully up to date. It's a very new document adopted in February 2019. It's a great shame to deviate from it. However, on closer reading, that plan does state that the requirement for smaller dwellings should be around a third, and I suppose 30%, which is the application in front of us, is around a third. Had that document said a third, I would be pushing perhaps for this application to be taken away and redrawn. But on the basis of what I've already heard from our officers, I'm minded to vote in favour of approving the application. Is there any clarity they can provide on the issues that I've mentioned?
Again, I turn to our officers to see if there's an answer to those questions, Councillor.
Well, first of all, just to clarify that the report does say right at the beginning that this is an application for the approval of reserved matters following the granting at appeal of an outline planning permission. So it does recognise that fact. In relation to contamination, I think when this application was first submitted many months ago, the applicant's agent did seek to approve, as part of the application, the details relating to contamination. But the discussions were held, and it was decided that to separate that, and that they needed to come in as separate conditions applications. So Environmental Health made their comments on the basis of their original understanding that was part of consideration under this application, but it's not. So the agents will need to make an application to approve the details required by those conditions separately to this application.
Again, Councillor, are you content with what you have heard?
I am content, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, before we move to a vote, I just want to ask our clerk about this. Looking at who is here this evening, as I see it, Councillor Panther, you are here to look at this as a ward member and not as a substitute for a member of the committee.
That is correct, as I understand it, Chair.
Okay, so from this point onwards, obviously I can't call for you to vote on this issue.
Yeah,
nor can you vote on any other issue.
Understand.
Yep. Just so that we're all clear where we stand. So what I'm going to do now, if there are no further contributions from members, is I'm going to take a vote on this application and on the recommendations as we see them printed. And I will do this by name. And
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry
about that. Just an observation, actually. I don't know the area very well, I must admit, but on the previous till that you showed all the properties, I noticed a pool there. Now, are there anything put into place in case that pool overflows? Because with the weather that we're having, extreme weather, as you know, there's a lot of flooding going on around the areas. And I just wondered if anything was put in place to help reduce that. That's it, basically. Thank you.
Again, I turn to our officer to answer that question.
Well, that is there as a sustainable urban drainage feature. So for the majority of the time, the depth of the water within there will be less than a metre, but it's designed so that it's got the capacity for very severe rainfall, for there to be additional capacity within there. Okay. And the drainage authority are satisfied with that.
Thank you.
So are there now any further comments from members? In that case, I propose to move to a vote on the recommendations as printed. And as I say, I will take this by roll call, and I will do it by the order of councillors as they appear on the screen in front of me. So first of all, Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor John Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit.
Councillor Northcott.
Against.
Councillor Holland.
Permit.
Councillor Jones.
Permit.
Councillor Moffat. I can't hear you, Councillor, I'm afraid.
Permit.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burgess. And I can't hear you, Councillor. I think you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Permit as printed.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper. Again, I can't hear you, Councillor, I'm afraid.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's everyone. I can see anyway. Please do shout out now if I've missed any names. In that case, that item is permitted by a large majority. And we'll proceed to our next item. Again, major application, land north of West Avenue. And once again, we have a speaker on this item, and I'll ask our clerk if he can bring the speaker into the room. I know. I'm hoping, Miss Jacks, that you can hear us at the moment. Is that correct? Could you just say something so that we can hear? See if we can hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you see me as well?
I can't see you, I'm afraid, but I can hear you.
Right. I don't know if Democratic Services could allow my camera to be turned on. It's turned on this side.
Right, I'll leave that to our clerk. In the meantime, what we'll do, Miss Jackson, if I may, is ask our officers if they wish to speak to this report before you speak yourself. So obviously we want you to have an opportunity to hear what they may wish to say.
Sure.
Just to say that a supplementary report was published this afternoon, and in case members didn't have the opportunity to see that, we have received the further comments of the lead local flood authority, and they have withdrawn their objection on our recommending a number of conditions. But other than that, I've got nothing to say at this time. Thank you.
If I can, Chair, there is one other, the item about the town deal grant. It's mentioned in the report. I can confirm that as of today, we've not had an update from the government on that grant. It was due to be updated at the end of January, and we're informed it'll be an update in February now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. So that's something to bear in mind. And also, please, as Mr. Moulton has pointed out, there is a supplementary for this item, and indeed a revised set of recommendations as well on that supplementary. So please be aware of that. At this point, I can now see you, Ms. Jacks, I think. I hope everyone else can. And once again, just to make sure we know where we stand, I'll in a moment invite you to address the committee. You have 5 minutes to do so, which will be timed by our clerk. After 4 of those 5 minutes, he'll give you an oral warning to make sure that you don't miss out anything you think is absolutely crucial. And that will be the sum total of your contribution to the debate this evening. So on those terms, I invite you to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. Well, good evening, members, and thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak this evening. As you will be aware, this is a site in Kidsgrove on West Avenue, and it's been a derelict site for some time now, actually for over 15 years. And despite efforts to dispose of the site for commercial or industrial uses, there's been no take-up. National and local planning policies require new residential development to focus on previously developed land and in locations within easy access to local services and facilities. Indeed, by granting planning permission for residential development on this site, it will ease the pressure on the local authority to release greenfield sites and also the pressure to review greenbelt boundaries. As house builders, we often get criticised for prioritising greenfield sites without taking on the burden of contaminated land, requiring costly remediation. Indeed, this is one such site which does require extensive remediation in order to bring it back into active use. You'll be aware by way of the update report that the LLFA have withdrawn their objection and have agreed to a number of pre-commencement conditions. Whilst affordable housing provision has been agreed with your officers following scrutiny of our financial appraisal, the scheme still delivers 9 affordable homes, both available for rent or to purchase at a discount. A review mechanism in the 106 agreement allows for further affordable housing to be provided in the event that sales revenues exceed expectations and/or costs to remediate and build the site out are lower than expected. We've worked with your officers to develop a scheme which is acceptable in design terms, with a range of house types from 1-bedroom homes through to 3- and 4-bedroom family homes. Indeed, we've introduced more landscaping and extensive tree planting throughout the scheme. In addition, open space and a children's play area is being provided on site. All homes will be built with energy efficiency in mind, limiting the impact on climate change. As a national house builder, we're utilising the latest building materials to adopt a fabric-first approach to home design. This not only reduces the cost to the homeowner, but also seeks to actively reduce our carbon footprint. Should you grant planning permission today, we have every intention of making a start on site within the coming months, with the first new homes on site being ready for occupation before the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I open the item for debate, could I just ask our officers if there's anything they wish to add to or comment upon what they've just heard?
No, I have nothing to add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, if I may, from the chair, begin this debate, just ask perhaps Mr. Fleet what the consequences of this are for us not having the report as regards the Kids Grove Town plan. You're muted, I'm afraid, Mr. Fleet.
Trying to do it. Sorry. In terms of the allocation, the site has historically been an employment site, and that would be our starting point for any sort of new use on the site. That would be the preferred option. However, the government does recognise the need for housing, and it is a priority for the government and for local authorities to keep up a strong supply of sites, preferably on brownfield sites like this. In the government's planning policy guidance, which supports the MPPF, there is a section on supporting more effective use of land. And that's the key driver for looking at sites which have one use and are potentially coming forward for an alternative. And there are various criteria that are cited. For example, the time since the site has been occupied, whether there's been any active marketing on the site, and what's the allocation of the site. Well, it's white land. It doesn't have an employment allocation on it. It's been a while since it's been used. There has been marketing on the site. And those are 3 of the 4 indicators that all steer us towards the thinking about residential as a recommendation. The 4th point, though, is around any changing circumstances that might affect the take-up for the site. It's worded in the sense of it being unlikely, but the bullet point is around changing circumstances. And the town deal potentially could be that changing circumstance. Now, it's really frustrating for us that the government announcement has been delayed, because we would have liked to have come an informed committee of the government's thinking on the town deal. We have the site in that framework, and it is a potential to bring it forward for starter employment units. And the belief is that the town deal could be a gap element to address that. It would have been an update to have said that either A, the government are sort of proposing the site for the town deal and have set very tight timescales, they set very loose criteria, or indeed we could have been updating you to say that the government do not support that package and there is no sort of potential through the town deal to move the site forward, which would have all informed the material weight that we would have applied to that part of the principle of change of use of this site from employment to residential. So it's frustrating we can't add that, because otherwise on all the technical matters, and particularly flooding, which has now been resolved, the site does present itself as a viable residential site. And I think the applicants have done a lot to try and address those concerns and bring the site forward. It is singularly that sort of frustration that we don't have the information from the government, that we can't give you that piece today. Otherwise, there is a viable scheme there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. Could I now invite members to comment on what they've heard so far? Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was beginning to think you hadn't seen me then, raising my hand. I did do it via the side function there, but I don't know if you're able to see that.
It's just popped up now, in fact.
Okay. Okay. Having heard what the head of planning has just been talking about, then I see on here that we're not in that position to be able to determine this. And I would like to formally propose that we'll go for a deferral until to the end of the month, till we have that confirmation or not from the government, whether this is going to be a site which is going to be in a position to benefit from remedial work. That being said, if we do defer, it'll go, and that permission isn't approved, or that we don't get that successful bid, then the developer obviously has got the de facto position of being approved at the next planning committee if members are minded to do that. So I'd like to formally move this, that we defer to the next planning committee meeting to allow us to have that salient information, which I believe that we're unable to make that choice tonight without that critical information. And it will be an awful shame to miss out on government money at a time when funding is very tight, and deny the residents of Kidsgrove an enhanced area and to take advantage of the money. So that's my proposal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm quite happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Reddish. If I may, again, just explore this a little bit further, we are fairly confident, are we, Mr. Fleet, that this government communication will come to us between this committee and the next committee?
Yes, that's the update we've had.
Right. Wow.
So it potentially may come as a late item because it's been told that it is the end of February.
Okay. The thing that concerns me, and I think must concern all of us, of course, is if we do defer this, I think that and the government are not duly diligent in producing things, it will that will leave us in an interesting place come the next committee cycle. But nonetheless, I hear the formal proposal for deferral, and I will move to a vote on deferral in a moment. But first, again, I wish to give other members an opportunity to speak if they wish to do so. I don't see, and I'm now desperately. Oh, Councillor Jones, now your hand has now gone up as well. Yeah, and Councillor Maxfield after that.
I do wonder if the waving of the hand initiates the detection of that. I'm afraid that I'm a firm believer in, a bird in the hand's better than two in the bush. So I would not support deferral because I don't trust, regardless of who sits in 10 Downing Street, I don't trust government to get back to us within time, and I wouldn't want to be considering this matter at a later planning committee as a late item anyway. Quite frankly, I think we have an applicant here that is willing to turn the site into something that's good for the community. Housing in that location is very good for the community. We've talked a lot about Kidsgrove being a springboard for population growth. It's a fantastic town. It's got a train station. It's a great location for people who are looking at commuting or jobs within the area. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm afraid I think the community is better served by actually having housing on there rather than waiting and see whether a town deal comes through, and whether that town deal comes through in its entirety, and whether that actually ends up delivering on the objectives of that. So I'm afraid I would not support deferral of this item, and I would prefer to vote on it tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maxfield.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, having listened to your own concerns about it coming late, and also Councillor Jones, I have to be inclined to agree that I would prefer to vote on it. I know the area incredibly well. It's been industrial for as long as I can ever remember, and it's been left vacant for not quite as long as I've been on this earth. But I do think it would actually benefit the area. It would certainly improve the area, and it would make use of land that is just currently just sitting and not doing very much. And I think I would be inclined to agree with Councillor Jones and vote for it tonight.
Councillor Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Jones. I think we need to vote on this item this evening. It will benefit Kidsgrove, and as people are saying, Kidsgrove is developing. It's going to be a nice area, better than what it is now. And yes, I would agree with Councillor Jones. We should vote on it tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Any further comment from members before I proceed to a vote on deferral? I'm looking again on the sidebar. I'm not seeing anything. So let's just make sure we're clear about what we're voting about. It's been formally proposed and seconded that we defer this item to await the government report as regards the Kidsgrove Town deal, which we are told will be with us in February. So what I'm going to do now is ask if you are in favour of deferral for those reasons. Councillor Owen.
Against deferral, Chair.
Councillor Williams. I can't hear you. Sorry, Councillor, you remain muted.
Apologies, Chair. Deferral, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
I'm against deferral, Chair. I think we should have a vote on the housing.
Councillor Reddish.
Deferral.
Councillor Northcott.
Deferral, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Against deferral.
Councillor Jones.
Against deferral.
Councillor Burgess. You're muted, Councillor, I'm afraid.
Sorry. Against deferral.
Councillor Maxfield.
Against deferral, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Against deferral, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Against deferral, Chair.
I'll just consult with our clerk, but my tallying of that is that motion is lost.
The motion is lost, Chair. Yep.
Thank you. In that case, I am going to proceed to a vote on the substantive recommendation in front of you. And that substantive recommendation, as you can see, is on the supplementary report. So please have regard to the recommendations there rather than on the initial report. So in that respect, now I'm asking for people to vote either for or against the application and the recommendations as printed on that supplementary report. Councillor Owen.
For, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Permit.
Councillor Burgess.
Commit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Chair.
That application is therefore permitted. We can move to our next application, item 6. Again, for major development, land under Woolstanton, Port Hill, Dimsdale, and Basford. I know of no speakers on this item, so I invite our officers, if there's anything further we should consider before moving to a vote.
No, there's nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was somewhat premature of me because obviously our members are entitled to comment on this before we proceed to a vote. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, yes, please, Chair. Thank you. Renewable energy, you know, it's so important in today's environment, for today's environment. But I am concerned that where there's a big mining area and the methane gas, where they'll be drilling down and then come vertically, then horizontally across into, will they be into workings of Woolstanton Colliery. At one time, there was a pumping station on the site by the now Marks and Spencers, pumping methane out. So can the officers enlighten that? I've looked at the report. It doesn't mention any interference or the possibility of methane gas leaking through or being pumped out or a mixture of. Have you got any of that information, please, Chair? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I shared your concerns with the old mine workings and did ask our officers to have a look at this. So I'll just ask if we do know anything further about it.
Well, the report focuses on the issue of seismicity because of the the historic issues that there has with seismic activities arising from the mining activities, the historic mining activities, and the submission addresses that, and there are conditions recommended within the report, conditions that were imposed when this development was granted a few years ago to deal with that. In terms of the issues of gas, the Coal Authority was consulted as part of the planning application. They obviously have are there to ensure that the development doesn't put at risk any coal mining activities, and they do seek to ensure that any development doesn't affect their ability to manage issues arising from historical coal mining activities, and they've not raised any objection. The application is supported by a quite detailed supporting documents covering a number of issues, and that is one of the issues that is addressed in detail within the submission. This is an application that for development which is deemed to be require an environmental impact assessment. So there is detailed environmental impact assessment documents within the submission, and no issues have been raised regarding concerns of that nature. So it's all been thoroughly assessed, and I can confirm that the Coal Authority have no objection, and there is no basis upon which your officers felt the need to impose any additional conditions regarding that particular issue.
Yes, fire away, Councillor. You're muted, by the way. There we are.
Thank you very much. Could we put a rider on our comments to the City Council? Because this drilling goes right underneath residential properties from a trading estate, and looking at the map, I guess it's right at the end of the road on Festival Park, which is a little industrial estate. And then it's, if you look at the map, the drilling then horizontally goes right underneath the residential areas of the borough. So that's my biggest concern, Mr. Chairman. But again, at the end of the day, recognise there's a need for renewable energies, but with just caution, a note of caution. Thank you.
Again, just ask our officer, could we put such a rider on a decision this evening?
Well, this authority, the Newcastle Borough Council's local planning authority, is the decision maker on the parts of the development which comes into the borough, and that's all below ground. The above ground development associated with this development is development that takes place in Stoke, but the below ground, the vast majority of the boreholes are within the borough or under the borough, and therefore it is this authority that determined that application. If you wish there to be informatives or advisory notes on the decision that this borough council issues regarding that issue, then certainly we can do that, and we can still pass on comments to the city council to impose similar informative notes, because they will be the determining authority for the elements of the development within their administrative area. So yes, yes, we can do that in both respects.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moulton. You content with that, Councillor Williams? Any further comments from members on this item? In that case, I propose to move to a vote, and I think what we can do is, given there was no opposition to what Councillor Williams proposed, that we amend the recommendation slightly to take on board this notion of having a watching notice ourselves, and suggesting that Stoke-on-Trent do the same. Again, then I will take a vote by member in the order I see them on the screen. Councillor Owen.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry.
Northcote.
Oh, Councillor Northcott, I do apologise. This thing isn't very well.
This is good, isn't it? I'm fully behind this this proposal. I think, you know, we're going to have to look at more alternatives to fossil fuels as we go forward. This is a step in the right direction, I feel, in terms of ground source heat extraction. I think this will be becoming even more commonplace as we move further and the actual technology to produce it becomes less expensive and is more widely used. But in areas where it has been used, it's had a good safety record so far, of course. Taking on board Councillor Williams's concerns, I do share some of his concerns in terms of what could possibly happen, and I've looked at the details on the size of the pipes that they're going to be using and the systems that they're going to be using to extract this water that's full of heat out of the area. So I can say I'm fully in support of this this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comment from members? I'm now looking, I hope, very carefully both at screens and the sidebar, but I see none. Therefore, I am going to move to a vote. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
I'd like to permit this boring application, Chair.
It's always nice to have a little bit of wit in these proceedings, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
I'd like to permit this rather exciting application to utilise the underground former coal seams.
And also nice to have a little bit of fencing as well. Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit, Chair.
That item is clearly permitted, and we can proceed to our next item this evening, where again I believe we have a speaker. So if I could ask the speaker to be brought into the meeting, please. So I can see your screen, Mr. Brown. Are you? Oh, there we are. Yes, I can now see you as well. Before I invite you to speak, I'll just ask our officer if there's anything further to the two reports. And again, I draw members' attention to the fact there's a supplementary with amended recommendations on it. But if there's any further information we need to know this evening.
No, there's nothing further to report at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, Mr. Brown, once again, I'll just briefly run through the speaking protocol. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, which is the sum total of your contribution to our debate this evening. After 4 of those 5 minutes have passed, you'll be given an oral warning by our clerk to make sure that you don't miss out anything you think is absolutely crucial. So on those terms, I invite you to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a planning consultant acting on behalf of Marks and Spencer on this project. I don't intend to take up much of your time at all this evening, as the officer report outlines the application proposals and confirms that there have been no objections and provides an overall recommendation of approval. The proposals are very straightforward. The granting of permission would enable Marks and Spencer to reconfigure part of their existing Woolstanton retail park store such that it can stock an increased proportion of food goods at the expense of some existing non-food floor space. There'll be no overall increase in retail floor space. I think that's important to emphasise. I can confirm that my client intends to commence these works this spring, and therefore the granting of permission would result in this economic investment taking place over the course of this year. It will also create several new jobs at the store. Your officers have identified no policy conflicts with the proposals and have recommended approval. We gratefully request that this recommendation is followed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Again, before I open the item for debate, just ask our officer if there's anything they wish to comment on that they've heard so far.
No, nothing to comment on, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I invite comment from members. Councillor
Move the
Maxfield.
recommendation as amended.
Councillor Maxfield, before we move to a vote.
Sorry.
It's all right, Councillor Beige. I fully support this. I think, especially given the times that we're in at the moment, Marks & Spencer have obviously seen a need with regards to customer numbers needing to come in and purchasing things to make at home all on their own instead of eating out. And it offers customer options for shopping. So I'm more than happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments from members? In that case, I will proceed to a vote. And again, I draw members' attention to the fact that there is a revised recommendation on the supplementary report. That's what we will be voting on. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Permit.
Councillor Burgess.
Commit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield. Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper. I can't hear you, Councillor. I'm afraid you're muted. Let's move to Councillor Moffat and then we'll come back. Councillor Moffat.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper, can you hear me? I'm not quite sure what's going on here. In fact, I think Councillor Cooper may have dropped from the meeting.
Yeah.
That said, I don't think her vote would have been material in this case because every other member had voted for permit. So this item would clearly pass, and I think we can proceed to our next item. That's again, application for major development, number 1 London Road, Bristol Street motor site. And again, I'll just ask our officer if there's anything to comment on here before we open this up for debate.
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing to add.
So I just point out to members that this is a very similar application, of course, to one we've already dealt with on a different site nearby. And speaking to our officers, we've tried to make sure that the dates of these things are as congruent as possible. So again, I now invite comment from members. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to refer to Newcastle's ugliest building, the building that replaced the former Savoy Theatre, on the basis that I supported the application to permit occupation of that development by non-students for a fixed period of time. I think we should do the same for this development. Although I would say that given its position outside of the town centre and close to the hospital, it might have been a sensible idea for the applicant to have put in for key worker accommodation in the first place. Of course, had the application been for key worker accommodation, they would have had to have made provision for affordable housing and provided more car parking spaces. So can officers assure us that at the end of the period that's being requested, during which time the development can be occupied by non-students, the Borough Council's requirements can still be enforced? There won't emerge a situation in which we are compelled to permit occupation of this building or these buildings in the longer term by non-students. Thank you.
And I look to our officer for an answer to that question.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. We would be granting planning permission on a temporary basis, and once that temporary consent has expired, then they would need to revert back to the approved situation. And if they wanted to deviate from that, then they would have to make a further planning application.
Councillor Jones. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Also referring to the previous application, I believe I voted against it, and I believe that I will be voting against this one tonight. I simply do not believe that there is sufficient car parking for this to be inhabited by non-students, and like many of those kind of issues that I deal with within my own patch at a county level, it simply puts parking pressures around the area and causes significant issues for the residents, many of which are long-standing residents, that were assured the parking issues would be limited with students based within these accommodation units. I simply do not think that those pressures will be alleviated with non-students based within those accommodations. So I'm afraid I will be voting against this, much like I voted against the application referred to in the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chair. You saw it this time.
Absolutely.
I'm just taking the point that Councillor Jones has very eloquently put. I should be voting against this as well, for the very same reasons, the lack of parking space for professionals if they're expected to use this facility. I know it's only August, but it sets a dangerous precedent as I don't really want to deviate from. And I agree fully with the parking problems that we have and face as county councillors. We're always getting tackled about this very point. So I won't be able to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Now two members have spoken in the same way. I'll ask Councillor Jones, who spoke first on this, whether he wishes to propose refusal for those reasons. So that if obviously permit falls, we have to find reasons and such like, and this would simply cut that Gordian knot.
Yeah, so I would like to propose refusal on the basis that there isn't sufficient car parking provision within the development, and would put pressure on the parking within the local residential space.
Okay.
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And regardless of whether they agree or disagree with that proposal, could I just ask our officer whether that would be regarded as a valid reason for refusal?
Well, yes, it would be a valid reason for refusal, but obviously members do need to bear in mind that we approved the Savoy, a variation of condition there on a temporary period, and there's no parking at the Savoy, whereas at this site there is, I can't remember, it said in the report, let's have a look, 148 spaces. So yeah, it's difficult really to see there that we're being consistent.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Colleen. Councillor Jones, before we move to a vote, and indeed, Councillor Northcott, I've seen you too.
I would note that in that application that we've referred to, it was mentioned that there would be use of the borough car parking facilities in the area. Of course, the Savoy is located adjacent to two very large multi-storey car parks, and therefore has plenty of parking facilities, and it was noted within their application, and I believe raised as one of the points to alleviate my concerns about parking with that very application. So I do believe there is a difference between these two applications in terms of parking provision within the local area.
Councillor Northcott.
Yes, these are, thank you, Chair. This is entirely a different proposition. It's on the outskirts of town. It's not in the middle of town. So our argument still is valid, I feel, that this is different. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've all heard the argument. We know what we're going to vote on. So,
Sorry, Chair,
I think the police is one to speak.
sorry, if I may, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Please.
If just for information for committee, County Highways did comment on this application, and they've, like Rachel commented, aware of the parking spaces on site. But they also specifically said that in their view, the site is in a sustainable location in close proximity to the town centre and the main bus station. There are also bus stops adjacent to the site on London Road. So we have a comment there from Highways taking a view probably counter to some of the thinking here that actually it is sustainable. It sort of puts us in a more difficult position regards a refusal reason.
Councillor Reddish, did you wish to speak?
No, I was just highlighting Mr. Fleet wanted to speak.
Okay. In that case, Councillor Moffat, I think you've raised your hand now.
Yeah, just very politely to come back on the comments that Highways have made. We're consistently in the same position in this planning committee when our knowledge of the reality of parking in the borough just goes against the snapshot version of what's available from Highways. And we know that we can do and we need to do better with things like public transport. And we know that when we can do those things, the need for that private parking space may decrease. At the moment, I'll support our county councillors on this committee as well, is that it is a terrible, it's a terrible cause for real falling out. And I'll be supporting Councillor Jones's and others' position on this.
Any further comment from members? And I'm looking carefully at both sides. I can't see any, so I'm going to move to a vote on the proposal that this be refused for inadequate car parking. Now, I think that's how you formulated it, Councillor Jones. I'm sure that you could work a longer sentence if that is necessary after the meeting is finished. But we all know what we're voting on. So we're going to vote on refusal on grounds of car parking. Councillor Owen.
I'm against refusal, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Williams.
Against refusal, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
I go for refusal, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Against refusal, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Against refusal, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
For refusal, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Against refusal.
Councillor Northcott.
For refusal, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Refusal, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
For refusal, Chair.
For refusal, was that correct?
Yes, for refusal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Councillor Cooper back in our meeting? I think she has dropped out. That was a fairly tight vote. I'll just ask our clerk or how he read those votes.
Chair, it was 5 for and 5 against.
5 against. Councillor Cooper has come back. Let's see if we can see if she. Councillor Cooper.
Did you hear that debate?
I just question if she heard the debate and how transparent we need to be.
At the moment, I can't. Councillor Cooper, can you hear us? I think the answer is no. That means it falls to myself to make a casting vote, I think. Bearing in mind that there are a substantial number of car parking spaces here, I'm afraid with reluctance, nonetheless, I'm going to cast my vote against refusal on the grounds that I don't think with particularly the highways comments that we will be able to sustain this, and it is not the case that there are no car parking spaces there. I can't say I take any pleasure in doing so, but I think having listened to the debate and having thought about the consequences of the vote, that is the way I will cast my vote. That still brings us now, of course, to a vote on the substantive motion. So I now want to ask members if they are willing to vote in favour of the recommendations that we see in front of us. And again, I will go I see councillors on my screen. So Councillor Owen.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
In favour, Chair. Oh, sorry, Chair.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Cooper, if you can communicate to us. I fear the answer is no, but I think once again, and again, our clerk will confirm this, I think that vote would have been carried anyway, regardless of Councillor Cooper's vote.
It does, Chair. Clearly carries.
No, thank you very much. That case will progress to item 9 on our agenda, which is something brought back to us, of course, minor development, the Newcastle Road Madeley. And perhaps here I'd ask our officer to bring us up to date with the various plans as regards this building or proposed building.
Yes, I can share with you the various versions of the plans that we've received during the course of this application. Just bear with me. Can you see that?
That's visible to myself, yes. I hope that's all.
Okay, good. Well, this was version 1. So by the time we reported the application to the last planning committee, we'd already received an amendment. So this is how it started out when it was initially submitted. So hopefully I can flick on to the version that was considered at the last meeting, which was this version, which hopefully you can see with the pyramidal roof. And at the last meeting, the decision was to defer the item to get the comments of the conservation officer on this version of the plan, which we received, and she has no objections to this version. And the version that we are now asking you to make a decision on, which is the one that I'm going to show you now, which is for a reduced height of the roof. So this comes down by 1.3 meters from the version that was reported to you last time. And again, it's a proposal that is not objected to by the conservation officer, and the ridge height of the roof as now proposed is very similar, virtually identical to the ridge height of the existing property adjacent to this site.
Thank you very much. I invite comment from members. Councillor Williams.
Well, it's a small point, but I feel that these buildings are missing something, a chimney. I know it's all central heating and through gas or electric or whatever, but they're missing out something on the roof. It's so stark. I'm really stuck with this one, Mr. Chairman, because of the design. It just stands out. It's just a stark building where there's no character to it at all in that location, which I thought, you know, I know they've changed what they originally wanted, but I thought they could put some little bits of design into that resonate with other buildings in that vicinity. So I'm really stuck with this, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. We put off making a decision on this application to hear from our officers who are expert in such things. The result is that we have a clear recommendation from our officers, and the application has been altered such that the top of the pyramid of this roof is now at about the height of the existing building. So I'm not sure that I can see a reason or grounds for us to refuse this application as it now appears in front of us, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comment from members? In that case, I propose to proceed to a vote, and we'll vote on the recommendation as printed in front of us. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Again, it's nice to see these little spices of wit. Councillor Jones, can you up the ante?
Like Councillor Williams, I appreciate a good chimney, but I shall vote to permit.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. That item is clearly permitted, and we can progress to item 10, where I think we have our final speaker this evening. So again, if I could ask that speaker to be brought into the meeting. So again, if I could just ask Mrs. Payne if she could indicate that she can speak to us and is in.
Hello, yes, I'm
Thank
here.
you. Thank you very much. Once again, just very briefly before you speak to us, I'll outline the speaking protocol. So you have 5 minutes to address the committee, which is the sum total of your contribution to our debate. After 4 of those 5 minutes have elapsed, you'll be given an oral warning by our clerk to make sure that you don't miss out any points you think are absolutely crucial to your presentation. And on those terms, I invite you to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. This application proposes a building to be used as an administration facility for the existing equestrian business at ground floor level and for grooms accommodation at first floor. It's proposed to be built on the footprint of a very similar building granted consent in 2007. Development started on this permission and your officers are satisfied it is extant. The proposed building will be comparable in size and design to the approved building and would have no greater impact on the greenbelt. The key difference between this application and the previously approved scheme is that the first floor will be used for grooms accommodation to be occupied by the owner of the equestrian centre. A detailed justification has been put forward in support of this, and I'd just like to summarise some of the key points. Bolterley Equestrian Centre provides specialist retirement livery. The business is unique and there are few such liveries in the country. The horses at Bolterley are elderly and require a level of care and welfare supervision. Due to their specific needs, there are horses that require feeding and medication between 6 a.m. in the morning and midnight. Also, horses often have to be monitored throughout the night. The applicant, as the owner of Bolterley Equestrian Centre, is responsible for the welfare of the horses, and the duty of care rests with her. There has been a need for overnight stays for some time, and the existing caravan has been used for this purpose when necessary. The need to use the caravan is becoming more frequent due to the needs of the horses and the demanding hours. A permanent solution is sought through this application, and as part of the proposals, the caravan will be removed from the site. In summary, there is a need for a member of staff to be on site 24 hours a day for welfare purposes. This is confirmed by the applicant's vet. There haven't been any objections to the application. We support the recommendation and committee and conditions proposed by your officers, and hope that you're able to support the recommendation of approval.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Payne. Before I open the item for debate again, I'll just ask our officer if there's anything that they wish to comment on prior to that debate starting.
No, thank you. No comments and nothing to add at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just to state that I fully support this recommendation, having become aware through my occupation that the requirements of full-time care of horses, particularly in retirement livery, it is an intensive job. It is critical that they have people there at all times in order to look for the animals. So I entirely support the addition of the residential aspect to this development. The occupancy restriction, which I would ask that our officers just clarifies, that occupancy in connection with the business or in connection with the care of the animals. And the removal of the existing caravan, I think, is all a good move for the applicant. So I would support this application.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you touch on the issue about the tying of the residential to the job or to the care, which I think most people from the outside would care about. So I'd just like, as you say, our officer to clarify those issues.
Yes, certainly the condition referred to within the recommendation, the occupancy restriction, is to ensure that the occupant of the residential accommodation that is proposed is someone who is associated with the equestrian centre, someone who is working within the business, someone who will be based there. On that basis, it is considered that the residential use is acceptable, but an unrestricted residential use in that location wouldn't be something that your officers would support.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. Any further comment from members? Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've got the knack now. Yes, I'd like to formally second Councillor Jones if that is indeed a proposal to permit. We've heard recently of similar sort of schemes like equestrian centres coming into conflict with this committee. This time I see no problem with this. An adherence to the recommendation, to the conditions, I would happily support this and second this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comment from members? In that case, I'm going to move to a vote. So I'll vote on the recommendation as printed. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. That item is clearly passed. We can move to item 11 of our agenda. Application for other development, Nutton Community Centre at Nutton. Again, I'll just ask our officer if there's anything further to communicate. I suspect not, but I think it's important to ask.
That's correct. There isn't anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. And Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. This application falls not within my borough ward, but within my county council division. I have to say, I find this application quite challenging. In no way whatsoever do I support the demolition of Nutton Community Centre, not without any clear plans for how the one remaining community facility within the village would be replaced, but that's not the matter in front of us, and that's not the decision of this committee. So I find myself in the unenviable position of looking at something that I don't support and finding myself in a situation where I need to ensure that my residents' best interests are protected should this building be demolished. Therefore, I would like to propose that we as a committee add the recommendations of the Environmental Health Division. I note that the officers have suggested that it would be incorrect to accept those recommendations, given that similar recommendations weren't made for a site adjacent to this. I'm afraid I don't accept that. Just because those recommendations weren't made doesn't mean that those recommendations aren't any more valid right now. I do think the highways just outside of this site, it's quite a pinch point for traffic coming through, particularly with the double small roundabouts. I think that the Environmental Health Division have made really good suggestions for prevention of any waste onto the highway itself, which would come at a road safety risk. And I feel that regardless of whether that was made for the previous application, I think it is valid for this application. And I think that I wouldn't be doing my role correctly if I didn't use my opportunity whilst on this committee to recommend additions that are in the interests of the residents in the local area. So I would like to add to the recommendations the report from the Environmental Health Division, which can be found submitted within the planning portal, made from our Environmental Health Division. I note that the officer recommendation from the Environmental Health is regarding the construction environmental management plan. I presume that would come back to us anyway to permit. If that would be the case, I'm quite happy just to take that on nod from the officers that that the environmental management plan would still come back to us, that we're not agreeing the environmental management plan tonight. And then secondly, I would also like to add EHP 2, which is about protection of the highway from mud and debris, which has recommendations regarding protecting the highway. I'd like to add that to our recommendations as well. And I would very much like it minuted that that I do not support the demolition of the community centre, but that I feel that I'm inclined to vote with that recommendation in favour in order to protect the environment for my residents.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reddish.
Yes, I mean, Councillor Jones probably took the words out of my mouth. I spend a lot of time talking about mud at the moment. And I don't think two wrongs make a right. And the fact that we did put a condition on for the health centre doesn't mean to say that we can't put it on for this. And I fully support that we should have this condition. Experience tells me that there's a lot of roads around that area at the moment that has mud on the road, and we don't want another one. So yes, I support and second Councillor Jones.
Okay, so given again that we've had two councillors speak to this, what I'm going to do is take that as a formal proposal that this is appended, and when we move to a vote, I will take a vote in the first instance on the recommendations with those additions. If that falls, I will then proceed to a vote on the recommendations as printed.
Just wondering whether Councillor Williams wants to speak first.
Well, I was going to say, Councillor Reddish, but that's before that we're going to proceed with the debate. So Councillor Williams most certainly can speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't support this recommendation on community grounds because we can let's say, concrete proposals to rebuild a community. It's in the Nutton master plan, but again, that's still up in the air, and they're waiting for funding to proceed. And in that, there is a provision for a community centre. On saying that, I know the community centre wants major works doing on the roof, and which it can't be used, and the council made it quite clear that they're not prepared to pay that amount of money to repair the roof. So I'm really in a really cleft stick here, Mr. Chairman. On one hand, I wouldn't like to see it left empty for want of vandalism. We had enough of that in the centre of the village with the sports buildings that were vandalised, and we eventually had to demolish them. But that brings the area down anyway. So I just like to just hold fire on it, but I'm really having a difficulty and supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see Mr. Fleet wishes to comment. Just before he does it, are there any further comments from members? In that case, Mr. Fleet, if you wish to speak to the committee, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This isn't a regular planning application in terms of weighing up all the various material considerations and future uses. It's a demolition notice. So the matters under consideration are really around the arrangements for how that demolition is undertaken. The fact that it's a loss of a community facility, unfortunately, isn't a material ground that we can use to refuse the application. But the matter of the conditions and those ones on the sort of mud on the roads and everything else, yes, that's a part of the consideration. Disappointing they weren't on the first one, but I know the environmental health put the 3 recommended on there: management plan, the protection of the highway from mud, and also removing the debris. And I take it it's all 3 of those that are sort of aspired to. My only concern is I know that they're keen to get on with the project, and we normally wouldn't bring these ones back to committee for agreement on the detail of the construction management plan. Normally that would be something to be agreed with officers and colleagues in the relevant services, environmental health and pollution, to deal with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a sort of compromise? And again, I look to the councillors who proposed the additions here, that were we to put those recommendations in, we would then leave the working through of those additional EH recommendations to the officers and such like to allow this to go on. Councillor Jones shakes his head.
No, I'm afraid not. This is a building of significant community value. It's in a large residential area in the centre of the village, or adjacent to what is now the only centre of the village, with the only community facility. I think it's in the public interest that we as councillors have our say on the detail here in a open and public forum.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comment from members before I proceed to a vote? In that case, what we'll take the vote on is approval as printed, but with the addition of the recommendations from the Environmental Health Department. Are you content with that, Councillor Jones, as this stands in your name? In that case, I will take a vote on that by name. Councillor Owen.
Permit with the additional recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
I'd like to abstain for the first time ever, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit with the additional recommendation.
Councillor Holland.
Permit as amended, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Permit as amended.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit as amended, Chair.
Councillor Northcote.
Permit as amended, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams. I can't hear you, Councillor, you're muted.
Apologies, Chair. Permit with the recommendations.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit with the amendments, please.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit as amended, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit with amendments, Chair.
In that case, that item is permitted, but with those additional recommendations as per Councillor Jones's motion. Let us move to our next and rather similar item, item 12, Cloughall Park Bulks Pavilion, Kids Grove. Again, I'll just ask our officer if there's any extra information we require at this point. I think that the answer to that is no, Mrs. Moulton. You seem to be muted there, but no matter. You don't look distressed, so I'm assuming there is no further information.
Yes, there is no further information. I thought I had unmuted. Apologies.
I invite comment from members. I see no member wishing to speak, so I'm going to proceed to a vote on the recommendations as printed. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Permit as recommendations.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcote.
Permit as per recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit as recommended, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit, Chair.
That item is clearly permitted. We can progress to item 13. To report residential development on the site of the former Silverdale Colliery. And again, I just ask our officer if they wish to comment on this item.
No, thank you.
I look for comment from members. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Just to acknowledge, I fully support that we now close this, and to thank the officers for their diligence and hard work in getting to an endpoint that didn't necessarily follow a standard route and meandered around a couple of different options, but I think we've come to an end that is been satisfactory to all parties, and hopefully will lead to a reduction of the ASB in the area. So to once again pass on my thanks to the officers.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I don't see any further comments. I don't think is there a need for a vote on this? I think in general we could say that the committee is content that this be brought to. I think it's fair to say a happy resolution at the end of the day. That brings us to our next item, where perhaps there is less of a happy resolution in some respects, which is the report on enforcement cases. Again, I just ask if our officer wishes to speak to this particular item.
Well, one of the cases that is reported, which is the Boggs Cottages, the 5 Bog Cottages Keel Road case, I need to provide an update on. We received, since the publication of the committee agenda, further correspondence from the Planning Inspectorate indicating that the hearing that was due to take place this week has been rescheduled until a date in June, the 14th of June. The reason for that is that the Inspectorate considers that that an accompanied site visit would be required given the nature of the site, and it's not a site that can be viewed from a public highway, and that couldn't be done safely in the current circumstances. So unfortunately, the date for the hearing has been pushed into the future and is now going to be mid-year.
I'm sure that no member this evening is particularly happy with that news. I don't know. I mean, my personal proposal is that we write a letter to the inspectorate expressing, I mean, we can't do anything about it, but expressing our disappointment at that decision. Councillor Jones.
I suppose this is partially a question. Well, it is a question. What changes between now and June that makes an accompanied site visit possible under the current conditions? Does the inspector, have some glass ball that dictates that the scenario will change in June? I presume that it's perfectly reasonable for the inspector to make, or for an accompanied visit to take place with appropriate levels of PPE, much like everything else going on in the country. So I think if we are writing a letter, it would be interesting to see what's going to change between now and June. I suppose the power, it's out of our hands. It's, the planning inspector is calling the show on this one. So it's not much that we as an authority can do on this, but it's quite appalling, really, that unless the officers want to come back and counter my argument with detail from the planning inspector, but I don't see why a delay in time suddenly renders the situation safer for a visit. Personally, I'd like to be persuaded otherwise.
Well, I have got the letter in front of me from the planning inspectorate. They're certainly not guaranteeing that it will take place on the 14th of June, but the wording is proposing that we reschedule this event to open online at 10 a.m. on Monday, the 14th of June 2021, in the hope that the site inspection would by then be able to take place later that same week. And they say that they'll review the possibility that the event can go ahead 1 month before. So sometime mid-May, we should know whether that 14th of June hearing date is fixed, or whether it's going to be pushed again to a later date in the year.
I think in the circumstances, and I share Councillor Jones's frustration, we really do ought to write, and I'm more than happy for the letter to be put in my name as the chairman of the committee, expressing our disappointment and also expressing our strongest wish that this be not delayed further than the date that's proposed. Would members be happy with such a letter?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Councillor Northcott, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. We had a little bit of a result last time we did this, but I'd be happy to put my name alongside yours in a joint request to make the same, achieve the same ends.
I think I'm more than welcome that, Councillor. I think the more names and the more bits and pieces, so to speak, the better. It is very disappointing. It is out of our hands, but I think it is important that we record our disappointment in the relevant places. If we leave that one at that juncture, as you can see, there are several other cases upon this report. I invite comment from members on any other of those cases which sit in front of us. And am I correct in thinking that we would still wish for a report, I suspect we would, on bogs cottages to come back regularly to this committee?
Yes.
So again, I think, I see lots of nodding heads. If we can have that minuted and make sure that those reports continue to come to every other cycle of this committee. Is there any comment on any other of the reports that we see in front of us? In that case, I take it that the committee is happy to receive this report.
Happy, Chair.
Well, happy is perhaps not quite the right word, but nonetheless that we will receive this report.
Yeah.
So let's progress to item 15, which is a report on open enforcement cases. And again, I invite comments from our officer in the first instance, or members in the second instance if our officer doesn't wish to speak to this item.
I haven't anything to add. I just want to acknowledge that that the number of open cases has gone up again, and so we are on an upward trajectory. And although it does seem to be levelling off, we would hope that we can bring the numbers down, and that the next time we report this in the next quarterly report, that the numbers will be reducing, will be heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. Yep, I think members will have noticed that the direction of travel is not good at the moment. Part of that, of course, is to do with the pandemic and access and such like, and we need to bear that in mind. But I think we also need to keep an eye on this and make sure that that our graph starts to head in the opposite direction ASAP, essentially. Again, are members content to receive this information?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Let us progress then to item 16, which is an application for financial assistance, number 1 Gladstone Villas, Victoria Road, Newcastle. Again, I'll just ask our officer if there's any additional information for us this evening. I suspect not.
Yes, there is actually, Chair. Just to advise members that it was considered by the Conservation Advisory Working Party, and they have they supported the application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lean. I should have remembered that Corp were thinking about this, so thank you for conveying their thoughts. Any comments from members?
Move it, Chair.
In that case, again, let's just quickly take a vote on this item. Councillor Owen.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Agree, in favour, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Reddish.
Receive the report, in favour.
Councillor Holland.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Moffat.
Favour of the grant being awarded, Chair.
In that case, that grant or that application is clearly approved. And we can move to item 17, which is the report of an appeal decision at Betley. Having said this last time, I'm wary of saying this, but I'm not sure that our officer would wish to comment upon this other than the report that's in front of us.
That's correct, Chair.
1 out of 2 is not so bad, Ms. Clear. Any comment from members here? Content to receive the report? That would bring us to our last item this evening, item 18, which is to consider any urgent business, which is urgent as defined by the relevant section of the relevant act. I know of none. I look with some some worries towards to our officers. I hope they know of none either.
There's no urgent business.
In that case, we can bring our meeting to a close. It's been a long and quite an interesting meeting in some ways, so thank you very much indeed for your attendance and your contributions, and do enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening.